Chris Duprey, welcome aboard to our program today. I am so happy to have you. We've spotlighted veterans in the past, and I'm always glad to have a veteran on the show. I'd love to start there, right at the beginning of your career, and even before you became a veteran.
Mm,
Tell me what was going through your head when you decided to join.
yeah, yeah. So thanks for having me here. It's a great question. So it actually goes way, way back. So my father had wanted to be a military officer, right? He really wanted to go to West Point. This is back in the early '70s, and maybe it's late '60s, but he didn't get in. He was like he was an alternate, right? So he's an alternate, didn't get in. So went to Pennsylvania Military College, which no longer exists. But he went there for a year. Then he got real sick, and his military career never came to fruition. So then I come into the picture, and he really wanted me to go to the academy, and I wanted nothing to do with that until, and this is the craziest part, until my eighth grade field trip to Washington, D.C., we went to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and I saw the changing of the guard. And while I am not tall enough to have ever served in the old guard, I saw that and went, oh my gosh, that's what I want to do. So I'm 14 years old. And from then on, it was like, okay, so how do I become an Army officer? Um, I tried to go to the academy. My SATs weren't great. So I ended up at Valley Forge Military College in Pennsylvania, got commissioned at 20, finished college, went on active duty, but I enlisted when I was 17. So I
Oh,
was one of those weird kids that enlisted while I was a junior in high school
right.
in the reserves, went to basic training between my junior and senior year, and then went off to college, became a cadet before ever going to, right? And September 11th happened my freshman year of college.
Sheesh.
And I was in ROTC class as it happened. And it was just this whole, thinking about it now, it was a life changing day. I mean, for so many,
Absolutely.
but it clearly dictated my career from that moment as an 18-year-old kid at Valley Forge Military College, right? Um, and so that's how I got, how I got into it. Um, and 2006, I went on active duty and got out in 2014.
You know, I remember everything about the moment that 9/11 happened. Like I remember being in the office. I remember I had this huge tower of equipment, electronics to my left, and I was coding away. And I remember, you know, my colleague walking into the office and saying, and I was like, "Bullshit! You don't joke about something like that."
Right.
That was my reaction, a complete and utter disbelief.
Yeah.
And he was like, "No, I'm not joking."
Yeah.
And I think it's anybody who was not a kid at that time, but was somewhat of an adult. It's a moment that we will never forget,
Oh,
to an
yeah.
excruciating level of detail.
Yeah.
You start off in the military, in the army, I should say, as what?
Hmm.
What's your starting point?
So when I got on active duty, I was a first lieutenant. I was an infantry officer, Fort Benning, Georgia, going through the infantry officer basic course. And, you know, I would say the majority of infantry officers after that course go to Ranger School. And I was always a slow kid, right? Like I wasn't there. And so I didn't get into the first Ranger School class. And my orders came up and I went to Fort Lewis, Washington before I go to Ranger School, which might seem like to those that aren't, in the military, you won't get it, but it's an oddity for an infantry officer to not be ranger qualified. And that I actually think that I attribute a ton of my future success on the fact that I wasn't ranger qualified and had to basically prove myself every step of the way because I lacked that that qualification.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so I started out as a young infantry officer, went to Fort Lewis, Washington. They were standing up a new striker brigade, so these eight-wheeled crazy vehicles at the time. And that was my first duty station, and standing up a unit, usually a first lieutenant's like a platoon leader, company executive officer. After like a couple weeks on the brigade staff, and the brigade staff consisted of like 30 people, right? Like it was all these young folks that had just gotten there. But I became the battalion executive officer for 2-1 Infantry, which is a major spot, right? So several pay grades above mine. And I actually got to start working with the battalion commander. And again, he was a guy that was in Ranger Regiment at one point, and he looked at me differently, and I had to prove myself to him, right? And so we built this relationship. The unit actually stands up. I do time as a company executive officer, as an assistant operations officer, and then I got to go to Iraq as a transition team deputy team leader as a young captain.
Well,
Um,
what how do you, like, there's this gap, right? There's this trust that needs to be earned,
mm,
and you felt the disadvantage, right?
oh yeah,
How did you approach that gap? How did you build that trust?
you know, I don't know if I consciously did it, but I just knew. And the funny thing is, I'm going to say I worked harder, and I really don't want to promote that. That's like the thing to do because there's definitely ways to be smart about it. But I think what I did was didn't. I leaned into the stuff that you should know. I leaned into being, one of my mentors would call it varsity. Like it was always like, how do you just show up and be the best and bring your best version of yourself forward every day? How do you get better every single day? And whether it's, developing a training plan and like really making sure it's tight, or just being super present, or taking the initiative. The idea was, in my head I had this little voice on the side that was like, you have to be better than everybody else because you lack this thing. Until the point where there was a point with everybody that I ever worked for, that the second that they trusted that, holy smokes, Chris has his stuff together, that dynamic shifted, and it wasn't this like weird thing,
Right.
but it was clearly there.
I think the incredibly important point that you're making that was not obvious is that you had this sense of self awareness, and you had a sense of where it was that you lacked specifically. It wasn't this general feeling of victimism and, being worse than everybody else. It was like, I need to get better here, here, and here, and I'm going to make a conscious effort to learn and to do the best possible job that I can. I think that's such an interesting point.
Yeah, I think it was. I definitely didn't look at myself as a victim of my circumstance or like an imposter. It was, hey man, you're 5'6". You're, I remember on like the EIB 12-mile road march, I had friends that could just knock that out in 2 hours, no sweat. And there I am, this short little kid running the whole thing because that's what I had to do, right? And so I knew I was never going to be the fastest guy in the world, and that I was never really the most physically fit until I went in command. It's a whole different story, and we could talk about how all that came to be. But as a young lieutenant, young captain, it was know your doctrine, know your stuff. When you're in that meeting and they ask a question, you have the answer, you know how to find it, you know how to bring what needs to be brought, and that's how you're going to earn your position. That's how you're going to earn the respect of these folks, which I think a lot of young officers didn't do, right? Like they had the stuff, whether it be the Ranger tab or some qualifications, but didn't have that substance or that desire to go find it always. And that's one of the things that helped me through my career.
So at some stage, you're like, okay, I got this. Now I'm going to help others. What did that look like?
I got lucky to get assigned. So I got lucky to be on this transition team with the Iraqi army, which was not some special assignment. It was they needed people, right? But what I got lucky with is I got assigned to 1st Brigade of the 82nd Airborne Division, specifically 1st of the 504th. And somehow I connected with the battalion commander, who's now a 3-star general, and the operations officer, who is about to be the brigade operations, like all these folks, like we just clicked.
Right.
So they requested me to come to 1st Brigade after that deployment. And through a great mentor, guy named Adam Barlow, who's a colonel now, former battalion commander, he taught me how to be a company commander.
Hmm.
And what he did is he showed me that his whole mission in life, while he had the mission that he had in his job, his number one priority after his family was making me ready to command, right? Like his whole mission in life. And so we deployed to Afghanistan on this really quick turn to Afghanistan. We weren't expecting it. And Adam and I planned a lot. We were the plans officers for the brigade at the time. So we did all this stuff. And then our rhythm was wake up really early every morning, go do the CrossFit workout of the day together, get cleaned up, go eat breakfast, work for 18 hours, rinse and repeat for about 7 months. And that whole 7-month time, while we were executing the mission we had at hand, he was 100% preparing me to take command. And when I took command, I realized that my whole job in life was to develop the lieutenants that were under me and the soldiers that were in my command. Not to be the good job, men, but to be the guy that was approachable, that I constantly got yelled at for having a hand in my pocket and a coffee cup right here as I hung out with the guys. And I just found that that's how you did it. And so today, I've been out it'll be 10 years since I got out on Thursday. And I still have people that I served with that I was either their commander or I was a staff officer with, that are still connected to me. And I think it's because it wasn't do what I said because I said so. It was, what do you think we should do? How should we do it? Well, what are you thinking? And really turn them into leaders. And so that's where it started. And then, if you fast forward 7 or 8 years or 6 or 7 years, really, then I got to transition and do that in the business world, which has really, really been fun.
So before we get to the business world,
Yeah.
I want to capture the feeling of first day, take off the uniform,
Mm,
haven't worn civilian clothes for more than, time off in a long time, but now you're it. You're in civilian clothes. This is your new uniform.
yeah.
What's going through your mind?
I was totally overdressed for my first day at work. Completely. Right. Um, I didn't really know how it was all going to go. And, I think I was pretty anxious might be the word, excited might be the word, but I knew that the hiring process was immediate,
Hmm.
right? My flash to bang on getting a job, I got 2 job offers in the same night as I was standing in an airport on my way back to Fort Bragg, right?
Amazing.
So it was like, I felt like I had what it took, right?
Right.
But then that first day when you got to drive to an office that's not a base,
Yeah.
yeah, it wasn't super great. Um, but I think after getting like settled, it changed a bit. But it was not
It's a
like any other
shock.
day. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
shock.
It's a
It's
shock.
a complete even with some time off before
Right.
I started and all that. It was
Right.
still like putting on a suit, which was the overdressed part,
Yeah.
um, was not something that I had done.
Right. Did they give you shit about that suit later on?
I mean, I don't think anybody. It was not that kind of a company, but it
Mm.
was definitely like, yeah, hey, here's a collared shirt that says Ehrlich Pest Control on it, pal. You
Right.
don't need to. I was like, okay, so all these clothes I just bought, thinking that,
Mm.
yeah, I guess I don't need them. Let me go back to the store and get a whole bunch of Dockers or something, right? Like,
Right.
um, because at least I grew up in the wartime army. Nobody talked about business casual when I
Right.
was
Right.
in, like that wasn't a thing we
Right.
discussed, right? Like it was like how to get ready to go to Iraq or Afghanistan.
Although we do have the formal version and the field version. Yeah.
Right, right. But here's the deal. I put on my dress uniform
Right.
once a month when I
Yeah.
was in garrison for payday activities.
Right.
It happened like 3 times when I was at Fort Lewis, and then it happened every month that we were home at Fort Bragg because that's an 82nd Airborne Division thing,
Yeah.
right? So you polish your jump boots, you
Yeah.
throw on your beret, you put on your like. But that was, and you did that for, I don't know, half the day,
Right.
and that was it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So this transition from army to civilian,
Hmm.
what was the lessons from the army that transitioned nicely?
Yeah. So I think the most transferable piece is people are people, whether they're a private, a sergeant, a lieutenant, like people, or a pest control technician or a regional manager. Like people are people, and so you know how you communicate with folks is important, right? So that transition, work ethic, totally transition, right? This idea of I always loved feeling like I had a chip on my shoulder, right? Like it was as I reflect, I probably didn't love it then, but it was this okay, how can I always be better? How can I always move the ball forward? That transitioned really nicely into civilian world, right? Like that got me enrolled in graduate school very quickly. That got me, okay, you don't know what a profit and loss is or what a CRM is. You better go figure it out because you're responsible for the EBITDA. What the hell does that mean?
Right.
How do you, right? Like I had to learn business real fast so that chip on my shoulder mentality
Right.
made me learn things fast. But the
I
biggest
wouldn't call
lesson
it
I
chip on your shoulder. It's not a negative thing. It's a
yeah,
driving force. It's
yeah,
what was promoting you to work hard, right?
yeah. So
I
let's,
would
I
call it
like that reframing.
ambition.
Yeah, it was yes. It was this ambition to be better every day
Yeah.
that propelled me forward. But the biggest thing I learned was I came from a very, I think the right word is homogeneous pool.
Yeah.
When I was an infantry officer, it was a male only field. Okay. And everybody, when I was a company commander, every lieutenant, everybody that worked for me went to basic training. Everybody went to airborne school. All the officers went to the infantry officer basic course, or my artillery officer went to the artillery basic. Like everybody had this shared language, the shared understanding, and the second you get to Fort Bragg, you get issued the Fort Bragg SOP and the 82nd SOP, right? And so everybody had this shared collective mission, vision, understanding. I mean, where we were, every morning they played, the 82nd Airborne Division song, right? So you're indoctrinated into this. I failed to see that not everybody had the same schooling as me. that not everybody had the same understanding. And this is not just at the first job. Like, I didn't notice this until my third organization, which granted was only 3 years after I got out. I realized it, so August of 17, September 17, I started Impact, and I realized, like, oh, this is why some initiatives didn't take off before. Nobody knew, like, we just weren't on the same page. But that was the biggest area that I noticed.
I think that's very fair. You don't know what you don't know, right? That's ironically also a big lesson from the army. That's one of the things they teach. You've done a couple years with service. You've done a couple years with architects,
Yep.
and there you used a lot of your planning skills. So that translated very well. You got promoted, director, principal. You learned about the business world. And then after that, you decided to make a change and you went into, in essence, consulting.
Mhm.
Tell us about why you made that change.
Yeah. So it actually just follows this story narrative, right? So when I got out of the army, I started networking, right? Like LinkedIn was a huge thing they pushed on us. This is
Nice.
mid 14s, right? And I found a guy that I went to college with, this guy named Bob Ruffalo.
Hmm.
And the funny thing, so we connected on LinkedIn. We started chatting. We were actually fraternity brothers. Um, and so we connected, and he started a company. And I started reading all this stuff. And just to show you how much I didn't know, I thought Bob invented inbound marketing because his company just talked about it. And I was like, I I remember calling my buddy and being like, my buddy Steve, and saying, "Hey man, I think Ruffalo created some new way to do marketing. I'm gonna go talk to him." And he's like, "Okay, dude." Right? Like, and so I reconnect with Bob. So I get back to Connecticut. I start my first job. We start getting together monthly to talk about leadership, to talk about what's going on in business. And about 6 months after I got out of the army, he asked me to come to Impact to be the COO. At the time, like, he had just read EOS or Traction, and he wanted an integrator. And I looked at him and I said, "Bob, I'm just like, I'm not going to go screw up your company. So sorry, I'm not going to do it yet." So he's like, "Fine." So we keep meeting, keep meeting, keep meeting, hanging out. Then at the architecture firm, I start asking him some stuff because we start doing some of these things. And he says,
Hmm.
"Hey, go read this book, They Ask You Answer by Marcus Sheridan." Okay. So I read it, and I called him. I was like, "Dude, this book is amazing." He posts on Facebook because he was friends with Marcus, who wrote the book. Marcus sends me a message like, "Hey, bud, really, really glad that you liked my book." Holy smokes. So then I go to their event, and Bob looks at me again, and I look at him. I'm like, "I think it's time that I come over." And it was because I finally felt like I was ready
Hmm.
to work for a friend and take a huge responsibility for someone that I truly knew, and, like, not that I didn't feel a huge loyalty to the owner of the architecture firm. Like, he took a risk on me, he trusted me, you know, but it was easier to take a risk with somebody that wasn't, like, already in your life. And I got to that point and I was ready. And that was really when I felt like I had, air quotes, made it into this post army life that wasn't as chaotic. um and from there, Bob and I did a bunch of things together, and we brought in Marcus, and next thing you know, Bob's company transitions into this coaching and training company. And as COVID hits, I transition from being a chief operating officer to being a principal coach, and working with Marcus and building all the stuff, um, with them.
What were your challenges and how were you helping customers?
Yeah. So originally, I was in learn mode. So Impact at the time was about 25 to 30 folks. They had about 5 remote employees at this point. And a few years back, they had had a big turnover, right? Bob was going through becoming a leader, and this team, he had built a leadership team coming out of that. And now I'm everybody on the leadership team's boss. So I spent a lot of time just sitting with them and listening. And it was really, really hard for me.
Why?
Because I mean, I naturally want to help,
Hmm.
and so I'm also naturally not the best leader, or excuse me, not the best listener. And so I've got a whole system where I hold different colored pens to like focus my brain on listening instead of trying to help. But I spent a few months doing that, and then I spent a lot of time reading and doing professional development. And I mean, I think my first year and a half at Impact, I probably read like 70 books. I mean, it was like it was at least a book a week. It was just filling my brain with everything. I'd already finished my master's at Quinnipiac in organizational leadership, but now it was like crash course in marketing, crash course in sales, all these things to grow. And a lot of it was developing the leaders at Impact was the
Right.
first thing, right? So it felt very reminiscent
That's
to
right.
working with my platoon leaders. And like the greatest thing that happened is when I transitioned to being a coach and really focusing on clients, one of my direct reports replaced me. And she just recently moved on from Impact, but she was the COO for like 4 or 5 years, and I got to help her in her leadership journey. The current VP of services at Impact was somebody that had worked for me, right? Like, and all these folks that have grown and developed, like I got to do that with Bob, the CEO. And it was super great. The days were, they were long, right? It was get in early, stay late. Part of the stay late, I didn't know this at the time, but I was on a path to going through a divorce. Um, which was the best thing, that's one of the best in my personal side that's happened. But I was probably avoiding being at home some of the time and staying at work. And then as COVID hit, it turned into really working with clients.
Hmm.
And I still remember the first company that I ever worked with is now like they're really big now, and you see billboards of them everywhere. It's really awesome. Um, but I remember working with my first CEO I worked with had been a consultant at GE, knew that he was way smarter than I was. And so now I'm in this like first real engagement with a customer as a coach, and he's one of the smartest guys I've ever met in my whole life. Um, totally made me into the coach that I've become, just having to go through that, right? But it turned into, as much as I'd love to say teaching people to ask you answer, I really think the thing that it was showing people the mirror and
Hmm.
showing them that they always had the stuff within themselves. That was true of my platoon leaders. It was true of the non-commissioned officers that worked for me, and it was true of the leaders at Impact, and it's true of all the clients that I've worked with. Is the majority of the work that I do is helping them see themselves a little bit better and helping them get to what they need to do to grow and better themselves in their organizations. There's definitely teaching and coaching on skills
Sure.
and things, but I think at the end of the day, anybody can do the hey, here's how you do this.
Right.
It's, do people respond to it? Do they like, I've got a client later this evening who shows up so excited to tell me the work that they've done
I love that.
that I basically just get to sit back and then ask questions
Hmm.
and have this fun hour to wrap up my day, right? And it's not one person. This is a sales team of like
Hmm.
10 people, that I'm working with on communication and sales coaching, but they are going to show up excited for that,
Right.
which is not normal. If you've never worked with sales teams, they usually show up angry and think that the coach or the consultant is just a waste of time.
Yes,
But
this
these
is true.
folks, right, like they're going to show up excited, and while I'm going to be tired because it's going to be 5:30 my time, I'm
Yeah.
going to end at 6:30.
Yeah.
I will leave that call more energized than I am right now, and I'm pretty fired up right now.
Yeah, that's definitely a testament to the culture of the organization. However, salespeople, and you know this, are extremely focused on output, on results, and on efficient usage of their time. And if you're wasting their time, they're not going to make mince meat about it, mince words about it. It's not. So I think that's also a huge testament onto your interaction with them. They see value, is what it tells me, and I've built and managed sales teams from scratch, so I completely see that.
But I think Ari, that's the connector,
Right.
right? As we talk about this, so I think as we talk about the thing that fueled me to be better each day,
Mm.
to like win over all these folks, if I had to sum it down, it was like I think that I figured out how to add value without being a weight on the books per se.
Right.
Like how do I add value that is above, what I should? And I think that's how my military career, the thing we didn't really talk about is, or I mean, I brushed on, but I was a non-ranger qualified infantry officer that commanded an infantry company in the 82nd Airborne Division. That is not normal, right? And I got a really good OER out of command. It wasn't like I wasn't like the 35th out of 36 company commanders. I was in the top 2,
Right.
right? As a non-ranger, because the value, like is just talking through this. It is the value add equation, and so when I'm thinking about folks, because I love helping folks that are getting out. The I've got this very weird state that I'm in right now where all of the guys that were my bosses
Mm.
have either retired or are about to retire. And it's happened since I've been a coach. And you connect with them and you see them. And I'm so happy to see that they're moving into these other things. But I'm like, some of the roles I see them initially take, I sit back and go, you commanded an infantry battalion.
Right.
And now you're going to be a project man. Like, I hope that's what you wanted to do.
Right.
Or was it the quickest path? And so I love sharing a bit of my story with them to say like, hey, yeah, it took me a little bit of time, but you have a lot more credentials than I did.
Mm.
You can find the crazy business owner that is willing to just go, you know what? Yeah, you command an infantry battalion. Come help me run my company. We'll figure it out together. Because I think that's the piece that people miss is that like purpose. If you allow me, that's one quick story of
Mm. Absolutely.
I was at Impact and I had a platoon leader call me, like one of my former platoon leaders. He's like, sir, I freaking hate my job, but I see you on LinkedIn. Looks like you're having fun. And after I told him to stop calling me sir and just call me Chris, it was like, hey, like talk to me about what's up. And he lacked purpose. Like he's like, dude, I'm making so much money, but I'm selling medical supplies and I could care less about selling medical supplies. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay,
Mission.
great, great, great. Yeah. Well, and the funny thing is he has a identical twin brother who loved selling medical supplies, right? But this guy, that's not what his thing was. And so I actually tried to hire him at Impact. Like I was just going to make up a role, right? And then he started interviewing with a really cool organization um, in the seafood industry. And it was for like this assistant GM role.
Mm.
And he used me as a reference. And I remember talking, I can tell you exactly where I was. And I said, well, hey, check it out. If you don't hire him, I'm going to make him a job offer tomorrow.
Right.
He got the job. And like the day that he started, he got promoted to general manager because the GM left.
Oh wow.
And so, yeah. but I saw him a year and a half later, and he had a longshoreman's beard with we were in Boston. He had this huge beard, the hugest smile on his face. He was getting engaged, doing all
Nice.
like, but he found his purpose
Right.
doing the thing. And that was like the most fulfilling piece because too many veterans like go into this transition unaware of what like I mean, so naive. I didn't know that property tax was a thing. I was a 31 year old, adult who bought his first house was like, property tax? What are you talking about?
Right.
Right? Because I have been on active duty my whole adult life. And so for those that like don't have that and like they need that. And so one of my little passions here is definitely trying to figure out how to help in that realm. Um, so
I'll just say that this concept of mission is huge, I think, for veterans. And when you leave the service, it doesn't stop.
right,
And I think there's a search for that in civilian life, to have that mission, to have benefit to society, and to provide that kind of contribution in a meaningful manner.
yeah.
So I would almost argue that that is not unique to the gentleman that you're talking about. It's something that I think is widespread amongst anybody who leaves the service, really.
Well, and I would argue, I think it is if we go look at like why do so many folks have imposter syndrome? Why do so many folks feel disengaged at work? I truly think it comes back to this: are they on a mission?
Right.
I don't really care what it is,
Right.
right? It might not be the thing you do for work. It might be the side thing that you do,
Right.
right? It might be coaching Little League. It might be like, it doesn't matter. But I think for all of us to be happy, if we don't have some sort of mission or
Right.
understand our own driving force, it is easy to get sucked into
Right.
all of the negative stories, to get sucked into the social media culture,
Yeah.
that like keeping up with the Joneses type
Yes.
culture. And I think that's really a scary thing. And so as a dad, it's like, how at an early age do you teach that so that it doesn't happen?
Yeah. I don't have the answers. I'll tell you that as part of my day-to-day work, I engage with social media. It's hard not to get sucked into it. I find myself publishing the marketing stuff, and then flickering through it. I'm like, what just happened? Like this cloud,
Yeah.
and then I have three kids like yourself. You have kids as well. And how do you show them and then they see me on doing this garbage, and I'm like, Daddy, what are you doing? And I'm ashamed to say. So my answer is like, this is just wasting my time.
So it's funny. My kids are my daughter will be 15 soon. My son will be 11
Mm,
next week,
mm,
right? And so they've grown up with all this stuff.
right.
Because of COVID, they watched me work
Right.
for years, right? So I'm like in the first floor of my house. The kitchen's right there, the staircase is there. Like they hear all the stuff.
Yeah.
And so recently, and I mean recently as in like last week, I started TikTok. And it was something I know. It was something I didn't want to do, but I had a really close friend who's a CMO who said to me, she's like, Chris, if you need to grow your brand, like you have a pretty decent following on LinkedIn, but it's all about this.
Yeah.
And it's all this type of people. You need to go places where these tech CEO, these other folks are. So I started. And my kids think it's hilarious because of course they do TikTok, right? But
Right.
so I think it's hilarious watching dad do TikTok. But the thing is that I'm getting sucked in. I'm not interacting with it a ton. But after I post something, and I try to post every day, I am drawn to looking at how it's performing.
Right.
And a little piece of me dies every time I go to check how many views,
That's
right?
right.
But I think openly talking about it is the way that I approach it with them. I'm like, hey, listen, dad does not doom scroll all night,
Yeah.
right? And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing if that's how you wind down,
Mm,
but holy smokes, if that's all you do, you're probably
right.
going to get sucked into it faster. So, we have conversations about how much time we should spend on social media.
Mm,
And I try to show them like that I pick up books and read books and not
right.
use my phone all the time, right?
Right.
And so that's the key. But it's so part of our culture today.
Right.
And if you think when we were teenagers and in our early 20s, it had just started, but it was not. I mean, we didn't have the iPhone, right? I
Yeah.
had a flip phone in college, right? And today, just life is different. And I don't think
Right.
it's worse. It's just we got to openly address that stuff.
Yeah. And back in the day, it was, what was it, ICQ, and there were the chat rooms before, and this whole concept of being able to talk to people from anywhere around the world was just
Right.
chat at that day. That was incredible. We used to spend hours
Yeah,
just talking to people.
yeah,
But that was that was back in the day,
yeah,
scrolling version of it. But it was useless, right? There wasn't real relationships that you made with people that you knew or met or anything. And if anything, there was an element of danger to it, right? We were
yeah,
young, meeting people we didn't know who they were.
yeah.
Um, so
But now,
we
but
had our
now,
version of it, right?
yeah, now it's this new version. But like, here's
Yeah,
here's the reality. While anything can be harmful to us, it can also be helpful. So we
yeah,
would have never met if not for social media,
right,
right?
right,
And
right.
and there's tons of clients I have that I never would have met if it wasn't for the internet market, like all these different things.
I think that's such a huge takeaway because you can take a hammer, you can smash somebody in the head. You can take a hammer, you can build a house.
Right,
Is the hammer good? Is the hammer evil? No, it's a tool.
right.
The person who makes the hammer good or evil is the user and how they use it and how to what end. And that's what I try to teach my kids. But I got to tell you, it doesn't feel good. I post the TikToks and then
Yeah,
I'm scrolling and I'm like, what am I doing?
right. Oh, because it's so addictive,
It's so addictive.
right?
Yeah.
But I think the same thing applies to the next big thing that's out there, which is artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
So I've been speaking. So as this story continues, right? Like I became a speaker for Vistage,
Mm,
and the topic I've been speaking on the most right now is how do you bring artificial intelligence into organizations? And you'd be surprised at where people at are on the spectrum. But the thing that sticks to me is my daughter thinks it's cheating. My son thinks it's great.
mm. I
And
think they're both right, by the way.
exactly. And so it becomes, well, do we, in your hammer analogy, it's like, well, think about the calculator.
Yeah.
Like, I sort of remember how to do long division, but do you think I'm writing out long division when I can pull out my phone and just have a calculator right here? Of course I'm going to calculator. So it's how do we leverage the new parts of technology for good and to move forward while not having it suck us back.
Right. Right. You didn't say it, but what I read between the lines when you were talking before, it's really about values, right? The mission is not only about doing something that you're into, but it's about living by a set of values that you believe in, that is driving you, that you're doing something which is meaningful, which is
Mm-hmm.
part of your mission, right?
Yeah,
And then when we come back to social media and this idea of tools, it's the same thing.
yeah,
It's this idea of how are you using the tool to what end? And I'll make an argument. If you put in the social media, write an article about this in the voice of this, and use this data, and that to me is plagiarism. Now, maybe not legally, maybe
sure,
not,
but it's at
but to
least
me
cheating.
that's plagiarism. It's
Yeah,
it's cheating, right? If you write up a whole page of your brain dump of everything you think on a subject, and then you say rewrite that for grammar and structure and flow, and make sure it has a story arc. That's not cheating. That's you. You've
Right.
basically used AI as a ghostwriter, or somebody to help you restructure your words, but it's you. You are coming out in that. So to me, that's the hammer
Yeah.
building a house.
Yeah. So I look at it, to put a nail on it, I look at it as an intern.
Right.
It's like the smartest, best intern you're ever going to have.
Right.
But you would never publish something that an intern wrote without reviewing it, changing it, tweaking it, adding your stuff. To me, that's the part. The way that you described using AI in the brain dump everything, that's
Right.
me. I talk to
Right.
ChatGPT from here. I ramble for 10 minutes and I
Yeah.
say, now go take that, put it in this framework, use this, do
Yeah.
that. And I've trained it how to write like me. And then I go rewrite the whole thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it sped up my process
Oh,
tenfold.
100%.
Right. Tenfold.
100%.
And so I think with all the stuff that we're talking about, if I was to like for me, the thing I want to espouse, and I think the thing that's brought me, success is the idea of always trying to be better every day,
Yep.
and having this natural instinct to have, disciplined initiative to do it, but also be doing it for the betterment of others, right? So is there always going to be some self benefit from landing a new client, doing a new thing? Of course there
Of
is.
course. Of course.
But what I've found, especially coaching organizations and just even being self reflective, is when I act in my own best interest, not the person that I'm working with, it doesn't go well.
Right.
When I act in my the other party's best interest, that is when I get there.
That's it. I mean, he is the father of, how to make friends influence
Yeah.
people, right? Dale Carnegie. Don't think about yourself. Think about your client, your customer,
Right.
your spouse, your son, whoever. Put yourself in their shoes. I mean, it's so fundamental, right? That's
Right.
such important advice. And I'm shocked to see how much we don't do that in
Oh,
day to day.
listen, when you watch leadership team meetings, when you watch
Right.
one-on-ones, when you
Me,
watch
me, me, me,
sales
me.
calls, that's it. And
Yeah.
so now the coaching that I'm doing, right, in my company, the Question First Group, is helping people. We have a framework in a box, but it's if we're benefiting the person we're talking to,
That's
they
right.
are the beneficiary. Yes, we want to ask more questions so that they get to self-discovery, but it's also okay if we fall into this instructor role sometimes.
Yeah.
As long as we're up here, the second that it's about us, our communication fails. People might just be compliant, but they're not going to be committed. Nobody develops, and you just don't have these real relationships that make business and life fun and
Right.
worth doing.
Yeah.
Right.
There's so much to be said about this idea, and this is the name of the business, right? It's question first.
Yeah. The question
But
first.
there's so much in that name,
Mm-hmm.
because this concept of jumping to solutions. I know what you need. Well, hold on. Do you know me? Do you know my problems? Do you know what I'm doing? Like, how do you know? No, you know what you want to give me. That's what you know, right? That's the dynamic. And we see this. People jump onto a sales meeting and they're like, oh, I'm going to ask a few discovery questions. But that they're just doing it because they
Right.
have to.
Right.
And then they're telling me what I need.
Right.
And
And
if it's
they're
outside of their spectrum, what are they going to do?
right.
It's
Oh,
like,
well, and here's the thing. And go back and think about the last sales call you were on. My gut tells me from watching hundreds, if not thousands, of sales calls in the last 2 years. They asked you a question, you
yeah,
gave an answer that should have had 2 to 5 follow-up questions to
that's right.
fully understand, but they moved on immediately. That is the number one way salespeople break trust or show buyers
Right.
that they are just there for them. I'm trying to
That's
make a
right.
sale, not
That's
trying to
right.
help you. And I equate this when I talk to folks. I think you'll appreciate this. I say asking questions and especially digging deeper and following up. That is your a communicator's version of reconnaissance. We, I hear an answer. I have assumptions.
Right.
My job is to now confirm or deny said assumptions.
Yes.
And so when I was an Army officer, when we're planning an attack, every echelon of the organization had reconnaissance happen somewhere throughout the planning process. So at the division and above level, you're talking satellites and planes and all this stuff. Down to an infantry company or an infantry platoon, you have two paratroopers crawling up to the objective going, okay, yep, there's bad guys there, right? That is questions for us as
Right.
business folks.
Right.
Because when we don't
Here,
ask those questions,
here's
we
where I think this fails. Right. We're trained as salespeople to mirror. We're trained as salespeople to the yes and. We're trained to be positive. And I think a lot of salespeople don't appreciate the art of not arguing, but conflicting the customer in a very subtle way.
Mhm,
Hold on. You told me that XYZ, but how does that make sense with Y?
exactly.
Now, the art of doing that, it shows that you have a deep understanding of their business and something in what they said made you curious and you want to learn, you want to understand, you want to understand the dynamic of their business. That's not a bad thing.
Right? No, that's, I mean, there's a whole book on what you just said, right? Like the Challenger sale is it's a great book for a reason. But the idea is if you're really there to help folks, when they say things
You're
that make you
curious.
go, huh, you're going to ask them what they meant.
Right.
And if you're really good and you're really there to be helpful, you're going to tell people that they're not a fit when they're not a fit.
Yes.
And those are the sales guys and gals that win over and over and over again. And it goes back to they're actually trying to help you.
Yeah.
Now, do
Yeah.
they want to make a lot of money? Sure.
Sure.
But the person that's only motivated by making a lot of money doesn't make any money because they don't close anything because it's so easy to see.
Yeah. And that's
And it,
not trivial, right? That whole concept of rejecting the customer. But that's so important because if they're truly not a fit, they're not going to be happy. They're not
exactly.
going to refer you. They're
Exactly.
going to be you're not even going to be profitable from an organizational standpoint. And if you're unlucky, they might claw back your profits,
Oh, yeah.
right? From that.
Yeah.
So and then there's also this weird thing that people kind of when you say to a person, well, if you're not this and this and this, it might not make sense. They kind of want to, it makes them want it even more,
Right.
right?
But now we're in real communication.
Right.
We are not in the scoping questionnaire,
Uh,
just answering things. We are
right.
actually having a human to human interaction where
That's right.
information is being shared and listened to. And that's a key is you got to actually listen. And so when I work with these folks, it's always talking about you can't be thinking about your next question
No,
while they're
you're
answering.
not listening. If you're doing that, like everybody who's listening should know that if you are thinking about your next question before the person has finished talking,
Yep.
you are not listening. Full
Exactly.
stop.
Exactly. And then if you're not willing to ask a question and sit there and wait for an answer,
Right.
you're not going to win either.
Right.
Because again, like we have to get comfortable in the uncomfortable, and so often we don't want to do that.
Yeah, and
And there's
people know, right? If you're not commenting on what I just said, then you can feel it.
yeah,
So you're not building as much the trust that you need in order to get where you're going, right? It's
yeah,
closing the deal, building that trust that yes, I said something. What I said was truly listened to, and the response was truly appropriate to what I said. That builds trust.
right, right. And the funniest thing is that the key to it, in my perspective, is asking great follow-up questions. Because when we do that, that shows that curiosity. That
Right.
shows our deep desire to actually help you. And at a certain point in time, we're going to switch off and go, okay, great. Based on that, here's what we should do, or here's like but but we have to be curious. We have to be others focused. And I think that applies a ton to sales, but it applies to leadership, it applies to
Mm,
parenting, right? And how we get into those right moments
right,
to do it. Like, I know there are moments when I shouldn't answer a question from a child of mine, or from my partner, or from, my boss. Like, there's moments when it's answering is not smart.
right. Or do you mean answering or do you mean solving?
I mean both, right? So solving at times, but there's also, because of everything today, all, oh, well, you just texted me, so where's my answer? Well,
Right,
I mean, just because it's convenient for you and you want this information, like, I know that if I'm at a heightened level of work stuff going on, or stress, or I've been in too many of this type of meeting versus that
right,
type of meeting, my energy level might be down. That's not a good time for me to make decisions.
right.
And so this, I think it, you know, we could talk for 3 more hours about all this stuff, but it's like this idea of self-awareness,
That's right.
communication, and showing up for others, that enables and empowers us to, like, really go get after it every day.
Right.
And those are the moments, from whether it was army officer version of me to this, to to whatever, showing up for others on a mission to like, those things bring energy. Things that don't support that take energy away. And so I try to practice this simple thing. I'm sure you do the same. Is I try to put a whole lot more of things that bring energy into my
That's right.
life than things that take away energy.
Absolutely.
So
Chris, what an absolute pleasure. We are so over time. I've just had so much fun talking to you. That's a good
me
thing,
too.
by the way. Um, I'm going to ask you the question I always ask at the end of these.
Yeah.
Now, clearly, your journey has been incredibly successful due to you actively listening. And you shared at the beginning that this isn't necessarily an easy skill for you. You have
Mhm.
techniques and tools to be a better listener. And then that self awareness has just accelerated your career. If you had to give one piece of advice to our younger audience coming into the work environment and asking themselves, what to do to be successful. Beyond working hard, beyond listening, beyond everything that we've done today,
Mhm.
what additional piece of advice would you give them?
Have something not work related that you love always be a part of your life.
I love that.
So for me, and I learned this the hard way. But during COVID, I started playing instruments, and I had played when I was like a kid. I played piano and trumpet, but I bought a ukulele the first year of COVID. Then I bought a guitar. Now I have a room with,
COVID guitar.
yeah. Well, I got a room of 13 guitars. I converted my dining room into my band's jam session. I created a band, and I play bass guitar and regular guitar. And I'm disciplined about turning off from work and going and having some fun. And the craziest thing is, writing a song or playing a song, I will figure out whatever the thing that I was stuck on was, because that's an activity that still makes your brain work, but subconsciously, well, so you're having fun, you're getting filled, and you're solving things, right? So have something like that: pottery, art, coaching a sport, playing a sport, exercise, like whatever it is for you. Don't think that being a professional and getting there means that you should do nothing but work, because that is the fastest way to gray hair, to no hair, to like just being unhappy.
Right.
And the second that we're unhappy, Aria, I feel like we get sucked into the negative stories,
Yes.
and it's just not a good look, and it doesn't help us.
Chris Duprey, What an absolute pleasure. Thank you for being on the show today. I truly enjoyed this, and I sincerely say we will need to have you back again.
Awesome.
I appreciate you.
Yeah. Thanks so much.